welcome, Robyn. Thank you for chatting with me. I would love to get to know you. Where you grew up, and then we can talk about all your research work. So yeah, let's get to know you.
Okay, thank you, Conrad. It's good to meet you. And yes, as you said, you got in touch with me before Christmas, so Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And then Uther, yes, he's a friend and a colleague. We do a lot of things together in terms of workshops, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not an Anglo-Indian. People often I'll give papers at conferences and I'll think the content is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But the first question will be, how did you become interested in Anglo-Indians? How did you come to be doing research with Anglo-Indians? So I'm a Kiwi. I was born in Dunedin in the South Island. I'm Kiwi, Pākehā, New Zealander. And then I schooled in Hamilton in the North Island, and I now live in Palmerston North, which is also on the North Island. And I was employed until about a year ago at Massey University. I still have affiliations with them as a research fellow. But Palmerston North has been home for a long time for me, and I raised my family here as well. So it's where I feel very comfortable. And my personal life and research life have been very intertwined, which I think is wonderful if that can happen to people. So it was 30, coming up to 30 years ago in 1996, the 28th of December, that I made a first trip to India with my with children actually, and that was in the south of India. So we went into Chennai and did a triangle across to Kerala and then down to Kanyakumari and then up again to Chennai. And what I didn't realise is that I met somebody who had written a book on Anglo-Indians on that trip, Coralie Younger, in the last stop we made in Chennai, just before we flew back to New Zealand. I met her. She was staying in the same hotel as we were staying in. But I didn't know anything about her research until very much later. And by that time, in 1996, I'd already had about a 15-year relationship with the community that I also didn't realise. In that I and my family were sponsoring Anglo-Indian children at Dr. Graham's homes. And all we knew was that they had very Western names for Indians, but for Indians from Calcutta, mostly. And we would get report cards, reports of how they were doing, and a letter and about the sports programs, and always enclosed in a letter with a Christmas card and written by the person we were sponsoring. So we sponsored a number of different students. Always there was an invitation to come to the administrative offices in Calcutta if ever we were in Calcutta. So that first trip, of course, we weren't in Calcutta. We were just in the south of India. Yeah. But the next time we came back in December 2000, again with family, again with my children. And so then I met Anglo-Indian. I went into Birkmire Hostel in Middleton Row where the administrative offices are, and met Anglo-Indians then. And I mean, my work has been full, my research has been full of serendipitous events. So, meeting Coralie Younger the very first time, actually even before meeting Coralie Younger, New Year's
I've never heard of I haven't heard that name before.
Coralie Younger, she is now the late Coralie Younger. Unfortunately, she had cancer and passed away early in her life. She's a very truncated life.
And she's an author?
She wrote a book called Anglo-Indians, Neglected Children of the Raj, and I think it came out in about 87. No, don't. Anyway, the title is correct. The publication date may not be correct.
Sure.
So even before, so that was serendipitous enough to have met her. But on New Year's Eve in Madras, we'd gone to gone to a supermarket to collect some goodies to sort of celebrate New Year. We decided to do it on New Zealand time with, children of 8 and 10 and 16 at the time, rather than wait up to Indian time. So we got
Yes.
chocolate and Coke and chippies and things like that. And in an aisle at one stage, she was a woman dressed in a sari, but she introduced us to her daughter. I can't remember her name. And she said, "Can she please talk to your children, your daughters? She's Anglo-Indian. She speaks English." So that's the first time I ever heard the word Anglo-Indian. That I'm conscious of anyway.
Yeah.
And so that was also on that very first trip. And so we went on the 28th of December. On the 31st, I had met an Anglo-Indian.
And what was how did you react to that? An Anglo-Indian, what is that? The first time?
Yes, because she was asking if we could talk to the daughter and she speaks English. I presumed that there was some link there.
Yeah.
But I didn't think too much about it. I mean, there's just a lot going on.
Yeah.
But I distinctly remember thinking, that's an interesting idea. Interesting term that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
But I didn't actually explore it then. We're on, I did it for some time.
Yeah. Sure.
And between two trips of, going to India in 1996 and then again in 2000, I also saw the film, the one that was filmed in Tullygunge Homes, A Calcutta Christmas.
I'm going to be taking notes just so you know. Because
okay. And that was about Anglo-Indians. So then I came to understand who Anglo-Indians were, because there was a good introduction to the community before they then interviewed people in Tullygunge Homes and interviewed particular people. So that was before I'd been my second trip. I did see that, and so I was starting to understand who Anglo-Indians were.
Wow, a lot happened in that second trip.
Yes, yeah. So I met Anglo-Indians and realised who, by going to Dr. Graham's Homes administrative offices in Birkmar, I did then come to understand that they're a distinct community, culturally distinct amongst this milieu of mainly Hinduism and mainly Hinduism. And they were still able to function as a distinct minority community.
Yes.
They were still,
So obviously at that point in time, at least from that then till now, before you went to India, from that period to now, the Anglo population in New Zealand has changed. Perhaps you've met some Anglos in New Zealand.
Yes.
So it's probably increased a lot since then, right? You probably...
Probably, but it's still a minority, very small, tiny minority community, and less well known. I think Anglo-Indians in India, even though they're a minority community, they are quite well known. You ask an an Indian, and they do know, mainly through the schools.
Yeah.
So many people say, "Oh yes, we had an Anglo-Indian teacher, or I had an Anglo-Indian, neighbour down the road, or met them at church." But here, people don't know. In fact, I did a project 2000 I've actually written a timeline here so I can remember. 2014 and 15, I started a project of Anglo-Indians in New Zealand, and that was funded by New Zealand Asian Foundation, or Asian New Zealand Foundation, I should say, to get that right. And that was to explore, to try to find out what the experience of Anglo-Indians in New Zealand was like, and to get a sense of how many there were as well, and whether they, how they, what being Anglo-Indian in New Zealand meant to them. Yeah.
Do you, when you were looking at the Anglo-Indian experience in New Zealand, were you separating that? At least in my brain, I'm initially thinking, okay, is that like the first generation? Is it a different or a second generation, or were you categorizing them? Because the experiences are probably different, right?
Certainly. So my call for participants
Yeah.
So I had a website and put out a call for people to be who would like to volunteer to be involved in the research. And I said Anglo-Indians who have come from India themselves or are
Yeah.
descended from Anglo-Indians who have migrated to New
Yeah.
Zealand. So I spoke to people who were, fourth generation, that would be about
Oh,
the
wow.
longest, to having just arrived not long
Yeah.
ago at all.
Yeah.
And yes, there is certainly a difference.
Yeah.
There's also quite a few people who are sort of second generation. Their parents came, or one of their parents came from India.
Did you say
And
fourth generation as well?
yeah, there's one that came 1869.
What?
A woman married, Frederica, her name is. She married an Englishman in Calcutta, and then they came and settled in Dunedin. And so it's their great grandchildren her great grandchildren that I spoke to, and they really embrace their connections to India.
Yeah.
A couple of them, a couple of the great grandchildren, I've been back to India with, and to the end of 2018. They wanted to go to Calcutta to have a look to find the records, to see if they could find
Yeah.
any more about Frederica's mother. That was something that's a gap that
Or were
they
they
would
able
really
to?
like to fill in terms of knowing more about her. No, we didn't really. We didn't manage to get. We still have a few possible ways to track back, but it's
Yeah.
going to be quite difficult if the full name is not in
Yeah.
the registers. We found the registers though, and found where she had where their great grandmother had written her name, and that was very moving for them and for me being with them too, and knowing how important it was to them. That was in St Paul's
Yeah.
Cathedral.
Awesome. I want to get if I'm jumping around, and that's perfectly fine, because every piece is so interesting to go down that path, but then I always want to get back. I'm really curious to know like how you got started. Were you always research oriented, and if you did not meet an Anglo, you would have been a researcher nonetheless, because you seem like a curious person and you genuinely care about the topic. So
Yeah.
what were you a research oriented person, or was that your field? Were you?
Yeah, I'm an anthropologist. I'm a
Yes.
social anthropologist. When I first left school, I was good at maths and sciences,
Yeah.
and so I did maths and sciences at the tertiary level. Then I had my family, and then thought, well, I'm not actually. I can do it, but I'm not actually that excited by what I'm doing. So I thought I'll go back to university and see what does really interest me.
Yeah.
And I found anthropology, the study of people and society. So it's
Yeah.
contemporary. There's a historical context, but it's the contemporary lives
Yeah.
that I'm really interested in. And for my MA, I looked at downward social mobility in New Zealand of Pākehā, so non-Maori New Zealanders, middle-class Pākehā women who had separated from their husbands and identified as being socially downwardly mobile. So that's what I did, completely different topic for my MA. And I found that really interesting too. One thing that is consistent across most things I do anyway, is that I like to collect life stories. I think stories
Yes.
is a good way of conveying information and experiences, of
Yes.
course. And people are interested in other people's life stories.
Yes.
People are interested in
Yes.
stories that tell them something about
Yes.
another way of being human in the world.
It is such a primal thing, right? It's
Yeah.
sitting around the fire and telling stories. That
Yeah.
is such a primal human instinct. And I recently was listening to another podcast where they were talking about Aristotle, and he said, "Don't write things down, because that if you don't write things down, you'll be forced to remember and forced to listen better." Right?
Okay.
And so, well,
Yeah.
but the caveat is the only reason we know about that is because the person who he's talking to actually wrote it down.
Of course, there's a place for
Yes.
both. And
Yes.
writing stories is a way of sort of you're
Yes.
getting the stories.
Yes.
And we're much more literate than at that time
Yes.
too, I imagine.
Yes, that's my passion too. I love stories. Over here,
Yeah.
there's a radio show. It's called on NPR, and everybody gets, it's like a photo booth, right? But
Yep.
it's an audio booth. You get in, and you get like 5 minutes to tell a story about someone in your life, and they
Ah,
play it on the radio, and I'm getting goosebumps because I love those kinds, because I get to see, a small window of somebody's life, right, telling the
yes.
story. five
Yeah.
minutes it's like a tweetable story from a human that they and most of the times it's joy, it's grief, it's just
Yes.
a human story. It's so good. I love
Yeah.
that aspect of it.
Yeah. And there's so many things that we relate to.
Yes.
Yeah, from our own lives or other people who are close to us, we can
Yeah.
relate to other people's stories through.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I have always been interested in
yeah.
people's
Yeah.
people's lives. Everyone has got a story.
Yeah.
So you do need to focus it in some way. So my
Yes.
MA, I focused it that way, and my PhD, I mean, everything just fell into place for my PhD. Even, I've mentioned a couple of serendipitous things, but even when I was in Calcutta in December 2000 and 2000. So that second time when I was in Calcutta, my first trip to Calcutta, I also was notified while I was there that I had received a scholarship to do a PhD. And really, it
Oh
wasn't. It was
wow.
tied to me, not the topic, not a topic.
Oh wow.
I had suggested a topic when I applied, but really I was able to do a PhD pretty much on what I wanted to do.
Oh
So
wow.
that happened when I was in Calcutta as well. Just staying really close to Tullygunge Homes, actually.
Yeah.
So when I've told people this, so there's a lot of very, I mean, most Anglo-Indians, not all, I know,
Yeah.
but most of them are Christian and take they are, practicing
Yeah.
Christians. They believe
Yes.
in, believe
Yeah.
in God and believe.
Yes.
And so sometimes I'll say, it's so serendipitous the way these happen. They said, that's not serendipity. That is God guiding you. So
Yeah.
it's,
Is
it's,
that is that your is that your view as well? Given that
yeah.
all your yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It's
I do feel sort of extremely fortunate, and so I've been looked out for, and
yeah.
by supernatural, by God,
Yeah.
particularly in my research. So
Yeah.
many things have happened that
Yeah.
it's inexplicable in another
Yeah,
way.
one
Yeah,
incident, two is a coincidence, three,
yeah,
four, five, six, and then
yeah,
it
yeah,
gets
yeah.
weird, right?
Yeah, that's right. I would meet people walking across the street,
Yeah,
someone have tried to meet for a while, and
yeah,
we'd fall into conversation, and that would be that person.
yeah,
Funny things like that.
yeah. So,
Um,
so two things you mentioned. I just want to get some clarity on. You mentioned Dr. Graham's home. What
yeah.
was that all about?
Okay, so Dr. Graham's Homes is our home that was established in Kalimpong, so in the Himalayas.
Okay.
Up near Darjeeling.
Yeah.
It was established by Dr. Graham, who was a Scottish missionary who was working up in that area, who became aware of a number of children born of tea planter men who were over for just a period of time mostly, and local women, many of them married,
Yeah.
but they were mixed children, and sometimes the men had to go back and their children were left behind. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the origin.
Got it.
But now there are Anglo-Indians from Calcutta who are Anglo-Indians and born into proper established
Yeah.
families, but the families just cannot afford to
Yeah.
educate them. Sometimes
Yeah.
can hardly afford to keep
Yeah.
them.
For sure.
So they go for 9 months of the year. So it's a boarding arrangement. They're educated, but they're also
Okay.
for year the whole of their schooling, and sometimes they're quite young, just 1 or 2 years old, and they go up there to the sort of a nursery kindergarten.
Wow, that's rough.
First of all, yeah. Have you
Yeah.
heard of Dr. Graham's Homes?
I
No.
have not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in Calcutta, it's probably the most well known.
Yeah.
All Anglo-Indians in Calcutta, I would
Yeah.
think, would know of Dr. Graham's
Yeah.
Homes.
Yeah. I was speaking to another Anglo from Calcutta, but he's in the UK now. And the Calcutta, and I was telling him these Calcutta Anglo-Indians are these mythical people. We know they exist because I'm from the south, right? I'm from Madras, and we
Yes.
kind of live in our own bubble. There's right,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we know there's Anglos in Calcutta, but they're like, I got to meet one for the first time, so they exist. But
Yeah.
I don't know too much about Anglos and their influences in Calcutta. It seems so separated. And as Indians, we don't travel much. You know,
Yeah.
we don't tend to
Yeah.
travel within India a whole lot. So,
Yeah.
so meeting these pockets of Anglos from other states is a rare thing.
Yeah. 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 I sort of had similar experience, except the other way around. So my PhD thesis
Yeah,
was called Anglo-Indians of Calcutta,
yeah.
essays and stories, I think. And then from that, I wrote this Christmas in
Oh,
Calcutta,
nice.
which is Anglo-Indian stories and essays. So it's got life stories in it. So as I said,
Yes.
I'm interested in life stories. That's just been republished actually by Atlantic, just like in the last couple of weeks.
Is that book available worldwide? Or?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I can give you the links after this
Yes.
if you like.
Absolutely.
And so I wrote my PhD. I published the book. I gave papers and wrote articles, gave oral papers about that experience of Anglo-Indians. I always did say my research is based in Calcutta, but there were times like at World Reunions where there were Anglo-Indians from all over India and the diaspora, where sometimes people would come up to me and say, I mean, more than once, a few times they would come up to me and say, that's very interesting, but that's not our story. That's not
Oh,
how
really?
we see some things. Yeah. I mean, to some extent. So then I wrote this. Beyond the metros, I just happen to have these props here.
Nice. Yes.
Anglo-Indians in India's smaller towns and cities. So I applied for a grant from NZIRI, New Zealand India Research Institute, so that I could explore the experience of being Anglo-Indian in other parts of
Yeah.
India, not any of the metros,
Yep.
because there have been studies like I've focused on Calcutta. Others have focused on, Lionel Kaplan, for example, was focused on Madras. Alison Blunt was some of the bigger places as well. So I wanted to go to some of the small places,
Yeah.
Kharagpur and Asansol and Dehradun. Not that that's a small place,
Yes.
but there hasn't been research
Yeah.
carried out there. So I did. So I know what you mean.
Yes.
I know what you're saying.
Yes. So
Yeah.
when you choose these places, do you, at least when you were looking for a small town, did you happen to map it to? Is there a railway presence?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Well, so I should say a little bit more about this. One is it's co-authored by me.
Okay.
This. The other person who co-authored it with me is Anjali Gera Roy, who's a professor at IIT Kharagpur.
Okay.
So we co-researched
Yeah.
and co-authored this. So I wrote quite a few chapters, but other people did the research and wrote the chapters too. So it was what people had access to, really.
Yeah.
And it's not, in the introduction we say, maybe this is going to be the first of the books. We probably
Yeah.
need another one because
Yeah.
we haven't. There are so many cities. There are so many small towns
Yeah.
that Anglo-Indians do have a presence in, and we just couldn't
Yeah.
cover all of that.
Yeah.
So where people did have access,
Yeah.
I had a call this time. I made a call this time to other researchers. Would they be interested in collaborating in this project? And the book is sort of divided into railway towns, as
Okay.
you say. That's really significant.
Yeah.
Hill stations,
Okay.
and so that's Ranchi and Dehradun. Yeah, and also port cities.
Okay.
So the port cities were Pondicherry, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, and Cochin and Goa. Goa,
So-
of course, is a state. So there's a
Yes.
little bit of
Yes.
a little bit of playing with it.
The reason I'm
ideas.
smiling because you're telling me that some of these places you're telling me, like, I can see there are Anglos there, but some of the other places, like, I've been there quite a bit, like Pondicherry. and I never would. Obviously, it's silly of me to think there are no Anglos in some parts of the world, but it's surprising to hear people saying they went to Pondicherry and met Anglo-Indians
Yeah.
and Dehradun. It's maybe because of the railways, right?
Yes.
And the hill
Railways and
stations.
also a lot of educational institutions,
Yes,
a lot of
yeah,
schools,
yeah,
and run and owned by, the Hiltons, for
yeah.
example. There's a Hilton school, and their teachers own and run schools.
Yeah.
That's just one example. There's a number of families there
Is
that
it
do that.
just my wrong perception that I feel like Anglo-Indians, apart from at least the South, at least in Madras, this is my assumption, right? I always feel like the Anglo-Indians in more northern parts were more assimilated. At least they felt more. They were more assimilated into maybe because there's not many Anglo-Indians, and we were in our own bubble in the South. Like my day to day, I could go for like a month without speaking a Tamil. Right, my
Mm,
Tamil is really bad.
yeah,
I cannot
yeah,
speak another language other than English. But that was my
yeah,
life. But I
yeah,
feel like as you spread out in the north, and like that's my assumption that people are the Anglos, because they don't have many people, they're more assimilated. There are more Hindi speaking Dehradun Anglos than Tamil speaking Anglos in Madras, is what I would imagine.
yeah. I see what you mean. I think I see what you mean. Well, there's a lot of Anglo-Indians in Calcutta.
Yes. Oh,
Huge number. Yeah.
yeah,
And there's a lot of clubs, associations, dances, lots of social events, lots of families just socially um,
yeah,
are, are with other Anglo Indians.
yeah,
In the workplace, they're probably mixing more.
yeah.
So
Okay,
I think younger generations,
probably.
probably your sort of age
Yeah,
too, living in India, they're more likely to know one of the other languages now.
yeah, yeah,
But even Dehradun, when I met Anglo-Indians there, they would say, "Come over to come over for dinner. We'll invite some friends." All the friends were all Anglo-Indian as well. So there's still
yeah,
a lot of socialising
yeah, yeah.
within the community. In
Awesome.
church,
Yep.
going to church, lots of Anglo-Indians. I did, find
Yeah,
out what service or what church and what service most Anglo-Indians would go to.
yeah,
I'd often meet Anglo-Indians in that way.
yeah. And what
Pondicherry as well.
Pondicherry? I've
Yeah,
spent a
Pondicherry were
lot of
only.
time.
Yeah, beg your pardon. Sorry,
I,
I
I spent a
interrupted.
lot of time in Pondicherry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen more French people, obviously,
Mm,
than an
yeah.
Anglo-Indian. But I
Yeah.
would love to know. I have so many questions. Like, I'm glad this is
Yeah.
the first time I took. Well, I actually was prepared. I wrote notes, but
Okay.
but what was your approach in your research? Like, what was the goal, right, when you started researching, especially in Dehradun, and what was your approach? What did you want to find out, and how did you go about it?
Okay. So as an anthropologist, I
Yeah,
adopt what's called an ethnographic method.
yeah,
So I want to study a ethnic group, and what we aim for is what is it to get a sense of what does it mean to live in the shoes of these people.
okay,
So what's important to them? What are the challenges? What are the joys? Where do the joys come from? What's significant in these people's lives? So to do that, we usually do combination sort of field work. Ethnographic field work is usually a combination of participant observation, which means just sort of immersing yourself with people as much as possible. So when I go to Calcutta, for example, is where I've spent most of the time, but even Dehradun and Goa, I would just try to involve myself in these social activities and get to know people that way. And then I would ask for interviews, and always interviews are always anonymous. I use
okay,
pseudonyms so that people can feel freer to just speak about things more, honestly. So it's a combination of spending time with people and observing, and also seeing, if I'm spending time with somebody and going to a local market,
Yeah.
and I'm probably dressed the same as these people, I get a sense of people looking at me in a particular way, not just me, but the group of us are all in Western clothing. And I can visit the schools and see what are the sort of things that are taught in the curriculum. So that's part of, so participant observation gives anthropologists, it's a tool that, so it's a long-term field where it's not just, it's not
Yeah.
survey. I have done a couple of surveys
Yeah.
and they're useful as a starting point, I
Sure.
find. Useful as, what's interesting here? Like
Yeah.
when I was, like for the, beyond the metros, the Anglo-Indians in smaller towns, I did some surveys. Asansol, for example, from the surveys, I could see that most Anglo-Indians were very well educated and earning well. Many of them owned second homes that they rented out. And I thought, what's going on here? So that result is
Yeah.
different from other places.
Yeah.
So that gave me the question to ask, what is going on here? What is going on in Asansol that this is the experience of Anglo-Indians? So then you sort of have a platform to start moving in. But I didn't know that from the start.
Yeah.
I didn't. You
Yeah.
had to do a bit of the research to
Yeah.
find the interesting things.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Do you
Does
notice?
that sort of answer? So it's a
Yes.
combination of just
Yeah.
spending time.
Yes.
Somebody, an anthropologist, several anthropologists have said this, but Clifford Geertz was one of them, called our method as deep hanging out. Deep hanging out. So you hang out with people and speak to them, try and experience life as closely as possible with as the people
Is
that
that?
we're.
Do you
And
see
we
that?
can become friends that way too.
Yes.
I've got lots of Anglo-Indian
I
friends.
believe I can see how that can happen. Yes.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself constantly, because of your genuine love for this field and your curiosity, do you just do you is it is it easy to disconnect and just hang out, or is it is it easy to jump into, maybe there's no difference, maybe your deep hanging out is so genuine it's not work, so to speak, like now I'm an anthropologist, I'm hanging out,
Yeah. Well, that's what I sort of said at the beginning too, that I've been lucky that my life and my work
Yeah.
are very integrated.
Yes.
And you're right, sometimes in Calcutta people made good friends and they might tell me some things that I might have interviewed them and telling me things that they know the tape is on. Or
Yeah.
the recorder is on. And then they might tell me other things and I'll have to reassure them, I know you don't want me to include this sort of thing in in what I'm writing about.
Is it a constant off the record, on the record kind of a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, what else can I say? So my husband is Keith Butler. He's Anglo-Indian.
Oh, really?
But so Keith and I met, and after I'd completed as I was completing my PhD. So that's also what I mean, that in my
Yes.
personal life and my working life, there's big overlaps.
Wow. What are the odds? Like, there are so many, you bumped into so many things that related to Anglo-Indians. You married an Anglo-Indian. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like that many coincidences is not a coincidence anymore, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So
Somebody just recently was in touch with me, an Indian academic, and she was writing. She wanted me to write something, which I have done. And she said, I'm trying to find a couple of other people. And she said, one of them, Keith Butler, he's also in New Zealand, I think. And she said, do you know how I might be able to get in touch with him? And I said, I have a fair idea. You do know I'm married to him, don't you? She had no idea. She wrote back a text, she wrote back, oh my God, praise the Lord.
Did you meet Keith in India, or was he New Zealand? Was he in New Zealand already?
No, I actually met him in Melbourne when he and a group of they had a club called the East India Club at that time, had a conference. They ran a conference, and I was near the end of my PhD, so I had something to contribute there. And we kept in touch for a while before, he was there, I was here.
Yeah.
read each other's work. He's a novelist,
Oh,
so I'd
nice.
read some of his work. He would read some of mine. If I'd want to run something past him, I'd say, does this
Sure.
resonate? Does this sound? Am I interpreting some of these things that people
Yeah.
correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So early on, you mentioned that when you did your research, you spoke to people who were like fourth generation, right? And I also you had written or reviewed at least the term Anglo-Indianness, right?
yes,
So
yeah,
I'm always like those fourth generation people. I'm so interested like that they consider themselves Anglo-Indians because of the Anglo-Indianness in them, right? So
yes.
because they were
They probably wouldn't say they're Anglo-Indians,
okay,
but they would say they are descended from
got
Anglo-Indians,
it.
and they would claim that link,
Yes, yeah,
and want to know more about it.
yeah,
I wouldn't say would actually say, they're not necessarily that familiar with
yeah,
the foods, for example, and they're in New Zealand. There aren't the associations or the clubs or the dances that people can be involved in, like they could be in other parts of the world. But they're interested and want to know, and often they tell me that they've always been attracted to things Indian. That they've always had this fascination with
yeah.
things
So how would you
from India.
define Anglo-Indianness? Because I think when I was talking to Uther as well, Rita, right? And I was talking to another a friend of mine on this podcast, and her parents are Anglo-Indian, like grew up in India, moved to the U.S., and she was born in the U.S.,
Yeah,
right? So, but she's Anglo-Indian because
yeah,
Anglo-Indian nest, right? She had a daughter. She has a daughter, right? Who's also she thinks she's an American, yes, but I'm guessing it slowly fades out. But she still exhibits Anglo-Indian nest, right? So it's
yes,
I want to speak to someone who's on the tail end of that, right? And
yes,
like
yeah,
how long does it take to fade out? Like the
yeah,
fourth generation people are really, I think that's a good example because they admit they reflect on the
yeah,
traits, but
yes,
it's on the tail end. Their generation
yes,
would probably say, "Yeah, I got some Anglo, and I don't know what that is even." So it
yes,
probably takes
yeah,
around 4 generations, I would imagine,
yeah,
to
yeah,
lose that Anglo-Indian ness.
yeah. Yes, they have certainly a real pride. These people,
Yeah,
not everybody, of course, but that particular family has a real pride in their
yeah,
links to India and to being Anglo-Indian, and they liked the fact that they sort of knew that their great great grandmother was from Calcutta, but they didn't know she was Anglo-Indian, and so they liked that. They sort of answered some questions to them for them too, because some of the things that she'd brought with her were quite more British, beautiful table sets and
yeah, yeah,
that sort of thing that they still had and treasured. So they're very open to knowing more about Anglo-Indians. But yeah, I think you're right that unless the example you used of the daughter of two people who were born and
yes,
raised in India,
yes,
their household, I can imagine there will be lots of things that they may not
yes,
even realize are very Anglo-Indian.
yes,
Having a showcase, maybe even having holy pictures around, holy
yes,
statues,
yeah,
a nativity set that's not, I mean, a nativity scene, I should say, at Christmas that might be lit up
yes,
at the back and might
yeah,
be more of a manger.
yeah,
Those things that they may not recognize as where it's from, but
yeah,
so your friend will probably does know where it's from, and her
yeah,
daughter is only two
yeah,
generations
yes,
back as well.
yes. And I
So I
also
don't know if
think,
that really answers. I mean, I think I'm just confirming what you say,
yeah,
that
yeah,
unless there is the cultural input,
yes, I was
then it
about to say
makes it.
that.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That's right. If
because
these people had constantly mixed, if these four generations had, if their families had mixed with
yep,
other new Anglo-Indians coming in, if there
yep,
was the opportunity to go to dances
yes,
and cooking particular foods
yeah,
and going back to India and
Yeah.
fostering those links again.
Yes. Yes. And because I spoke to, I think in the previous episode, I spoke to a friend of mine in Charlotte, and Charlotte Daniel is a is they have a huge family all spread out all across Madras, but quite a big chunk of them moved to Dallas, Texas, or somewhere in that area, right? So
Right.
so as the new generations are birthed in that area, they are in this little community. So they
Yeah.
so the Anglo-Indianness is like the force. It's strong in them, right?
Yes, yes,
Well as
because it can be nurtured.
yes,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Reinforced.
In my case, my wife is not Anglo-Indian. It's just me, and I don't know any other Anglo-Indian. There's no other Anglo-Indian around me, right? So my
Yeah.
children, it's probably it's very weak in them. They don't think about it.
Yeah.
They don't know what
You're
it is.
interested in Anglo-Indians, though. So it
Yes,
might,
yes,
keep alive in them. They will hear about Anglo-Indians
yes,
through
yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Yes.
actually, my daughter agreed to do a chat like this, a little bit more of a formal or informal, casual conversation,
Yeah.
where I'm going to talk to her because I've never really talked to her about it.
Yeah, great.
So and she's only 16, so I'd love to see what she
Yeah.
thinks
Yes.
and what Anglo-Indianness means to her, because
Yeah.
I think for them it's just Indian. That's about it. It's all some mix, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
You'll have to take them back sometimes so they can go to
yeah,
a dance and go
yeah,
to do
and
something.
conversely, right? I think the acceptance, if somebody says there was never any gatekeeping as well, right? Like if my kids go back, uh,
Yeah.
and they are Anglo-Indians, not born in India, but that's everybody just accepts them, right?
Yes, yes,
On the
yes,
other
yes.
side, right?
Very warm. I mean,
Yeah,
somebody said to me one time that the warmth that I have experienced and had commented on, they said that's the Indian side.
yeah,
It's not
yeah,
the Anglo side. Not
yeah,
that you have to be British, of course,
yeah,
to be an
yeah. True,
Anglo-Indian.
true.
Yeah.
So tell me about the Anglo-Indian crisis that you talk about. The
Identity crisis.
Yes, the identity crisis.
Yeah.
Especially, I know now in speaking with you, because you did your research, you spent a lot of time in Calcutta. I think the topic was the citizenship crisis in Calcutta or whatever. Is that just because that's where you did your research, or was it a unique thing in Calcutta?
No, I think it was just because I
Okay,
used quotes from
okay,
that research. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Now, in terms of the Anglo-Indian identity crisis myth that I talked about, and
Yes.
I said they don't. I said what I've said is that lots of people who are not Anglo-Indians, or Anglo-Indians who have heard this talk, they talk about a crisis of identity. So they will say, this is people who are not Anglo-Indians, they'll say, oh, Anglo-Indians, they don't know if they're Indian, they don't, or British. They don't know if this is home. They call England home and it's not home. So they talk about them like that, and they have various stereotypes. And what I say is, the Anglo-Indians I know and the way they live, they know who they are. They have not got mostly they are not feeling, who am I? Am I Indian? They know they are Anglo-Indian.
Yeah.
And if they're surrounded by people who are Anglo-Indian, then that's further reinforced. And what I've said and what I say is, if they're living a European sort of lifestyle, that's because they're Anglo-Indian. It's not because they are trying to be anything else. That's how they have lived for generations. They've sat at the table, they have had cutlery, they are Christians. All of those things is not them trying to be British or European in any way. Now, one thing, it's probably a good time for me to take the opportunity is, I think another issue, and that possibly goes against my argument that they don't have any sort of identity crisis, is that Anglo-Indian, there's not been any history taught to Anglo-Indians of their history. Lots of Anglo-Indian schools, but There's no course of
Interesting.
studies on Anglo-Indian,
That's true.
Anglo-Indian studies, Anglo-Indian history. So if there's any issue about, am I Indian, am I British, if there's any, as I say, I think they know who they are. They are Anglo-Indian. But it could be partly because of that, because they think, well, who exactly am I? Can I tell? I can tell you the Tudors, or if they've
Yeah.
done English history, and I can tell you some
Yeah.
of the Indian history, but what can I tell you about my own history?
Yeah.
And it can be very little. Now, as I said, I'm married to Keith Butler. Keith is a novelist. He's also has been a teacher of sort of 10 to 13, 14-year-olds for many years. That was sort of his specialty area. He, at the moment, is doing this.
Oh, wow.
I know. The History of Anglo-Indians, a graphic novel.
Oh, nice.
And the reason he's doing this is because he knows there's no resources for youngsters.
Yeah.
And so between him writing the script, having done the research and writing the script, Harry MacLure, you know
Yeah.
of Harry MacLure?
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's illustrating it.
Nice.
So he's the illustrator for this. So it's going to be 9 chapters, a graphic novel starting with Vasco da Gama arriving in Kerala in 1498, and right through to the present day. So the chapter on the Portuguese arriving, then the Dutch, and then the French, and then the British, because they were late in the piece, the British coming. Even though people think Anglo-Indian means English and
Yes.
Indian, people often think that
Yes.
incorrectly.
Yeah.
Its constitution definition says European. It doesn't say
Exactly. Yeah.
he is going to be, he and Harry are going to be releasing at in Cochin in the next World Reunion.
Oh, yeah. Is that in
2026.
2025? Oh, 26.
26 January
Okay.
20. So in fact, it's the 11th of January, I think. So that's
Yeah.
for me, it's the 10th year. So in a year's time,
Nice. Okay.
that's coming out. So yeah, so I think that's also a contributing factor. If people say to them, well, who exactly are you? And
Yeah.
if they haven't got those tools, haven't had the
Yes.
resources. There's a lot of scholarship, as you commented, on Anglo-Indians, whether it's contemporary or historical.
Yeah.
But there's only a certain part of the population who will read that, or who will
Yes.
absorb that.
Yes.
But something like a graphic novel, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just the cover that's gorgeous, It's
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Yeah. I've seen some of
Yeah.
Harry's work. He's phenomenal. Yeah.
He's very gifted.
Yes.
I think they're a dream team in terms of producing something like this, producing this, not something
Yes.
like this, producing this.
Yes.
Keith is a novelist and knows that age group,
Yeah.
and Harry is a brilliant illustrator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know, or maybe because now that you said it, I'm just realizing it. Yes, we all went to Anglo-Indian schools, and there was no Anglo-Indian history, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's maybe like what's the influence, or who could possibly influence the schools to do something like that?
Yeah, this is where Keith is also working in this area. He's wanting to write a set of resources for schools as well.
Oh, nice.
So that's so we went across to India. I went with Keith, but Keith was invited to speak to the All India Anglo-Indian Association AGM in Ranchi, and he presented to them the idea and the offer of writing something for
Yeah.
them that they can use as a resource.
Yeah.
And we're just hoping that's taken up. So it's a work in progress, and with
Yeah.
fingers crossed and
Yes.
prayers, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
this will happen. Because
Yeah.
as you say, Anglo-Indian schools, why are they not teaching Anglo-Indian history or
Exactly.
Anglo-Indian studies?
It seems of all the places, right? Because
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm glad Keith is doing that. I'm glad that when I thought of that, it wasn't like a new idea. Somebody's already acting on it. That's
Yeah.
so good to hear.
Yeah, and your daughter might, although it's going to be written for that age group. I think we've we've shown this is a draft of chapter one, and we've given it to different people
Yeah.
and older people. There's a 97-year-old woman, Anglo-Indian woman in Calcutta that we met, and she just sat there and wanted to read it
Mm,
all. And she said, I've learned things that I've never known.
yeah.
And I'm 97. I've been in the education field
Yeah.
to some extent.
Yeah.
So yeah, we for everyone, easy, attractive, easy to read.
Yes. Yes. I think even like there are so many art forms that are, I would not say unique to Anglo Indians, but I've never seen it anywhere. Like my uncle used to do this great filigree work, right? Like all the
Mhm.
altars would be right. I'm sure you've seen that. If you go to
Yeah.
any Anglo-Indian home, they'll have this like
Yes.
these altars, but great like saw work.
Shoulder length,
Yes,
shoulder height. I mean, yeah,
yeah. So
yeah,
all of that is like the Anglo-Indian artwork that is kind of like nice to have. I'm trying to curate something like that where, and like books, but right, like that has
yeah.
an impact
Can you
is
see
really
the
nice.
two pieces of art behind me?
Yes,
They're at a distance, I know.
yeah.
They're both by Anglo-Indians.
Oh wow. In
This one
in
here is by Morgan, Leslie Morgan, who the late Leslie Morgan. It's called Miss Identification.
mm,
You can't see it. I can take you some photos and send them to you
yeah.
later out of interest. The one on this other side is by Michelle Olivier. So it's paint on canvas, oil on canvas, as this one is. Michelle is an Anglo-Indian who lives in England, and she's
Okay.
an artist. Both of them have a big, have done a lot of art on Anglo-Indians,
Oh
on
wow.
the identity. This one here is called, I think it's called Engelbert Between Two Stereotypes. So you can't see, but there's sort of two windows there with
Okay.
Engelbert looking in. And there's another young man, second generation Kiwi, lives in Pakeha, who lives in Dunedin, where I was born in the South Island.
Hmm.
He's curating an exhibition in February, next month
Oh wow.
in Auckland of some of his Anglo-Indian inspired artwork. He got a scholarship or a grant through the Asian New Zealand Foundation, spent some time in Lucknow and also in Calcutta, and has come back and is doing big pieces. He's a muralist.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, Guy Howard Smith is his name.
Okay.
Could look him up too, you see his
Yes.
sort of work he does. So he's brought jute back and is painting on the jute,
Oh
and
wow.
that's going to be exhibited in Auckland next month.
That's
So there
amazing.
is some art happening.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, which is fantastic. I think that's a real sign of there's been a lot of research, there's been a lot of biographies,
Yeah.
autobiographies, and now there's art as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. What is the how did you get involved, or who formed, I forget the name, but I think it's the Anglo-Indian Association.org, where you publish some research and
Yep,
what
that is
is that?
something that I really wanted to have the opportunity to talk about.
Yes, tell me
Um,
about it.
the the International Journal of Anglo-Indian
Yes.
Studies.
Yes.
Yep, yep. So it's a web-based journal.
Okay.
It's open access and it's free to access any of the articles. We've just published. So Brent Otto, who teaches at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, in Massachusetts. So, he's a scholar as well. We've done some research together on religion in the community, the place of religion in the community. And in 2013, we were invited to take over the editorship of the journal. So the journal was actually started in 1996 by Adrian Gilbert,
Oh
who's
wow.
now in Australia. And it's gone consistently through there. So he ran for about 6 years. Then Professor Lionel Lum from Canada, co-edited with with Adrian for a while, and then another academic, Susan Dovley, edited it, and then in 2013, Brent Otto and I. Brent is a scholar, and he's also a Jesuit priest, so he's a theologian, historian as well.
Wow. Can you connect me with him?
Yes, certainly.
Awesome.
Certainly. Yes, yes. So we were guest editors in 2013 because we'd run a conference or a workshop together, which we do alongside every reunion and
Okay.
sometimes between reunions as well. So we thought we'd like to publish some of these papers that have been presented, and we
Yeah.
approached the journal, and they said yes, certainly. And then after we'd done that, they said, would you like to stay on as editors? So we did. And
Nice.
so we actually moved the platform to an open journal systems platform, which just means it's pretty accessible, very accessible. It's open source, as I said. Now it's free for users. It's not actually free for the journal because we have to
Sure.
pay for the platform and that
Sure.
sort of thing. But we've had generous benefactors within the community
Yeah.
who have, and all their names are listed on the journal website,
Yeah.
who have made donations so that we can keep doing that work. Brent and I do everything for free, and all the reviews and things are done for free. But it's just that hardware. And we also have an editorial assistant who does a bit of the work. Because it has to be a blind process, we can't know whose work is being reviewed
Interesting.
and who's sending it in. So there's an editorial assistant that we pay, does a few hours a week, month. So there is a cost there. So it's Scopus indexed, which means that it is recognised as being of high calibre, high standard, and having this review, this blind review process means that it can be Scopus indexed, which also makes it attractive for Indian scholars everything about the journal makes it attractive for Indian scholars who are in Anglo-Indian Studies. One, because it's free to download these articles, and also because it has the standing that their universities will recognise if they want to publish them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's
that's
some serious work. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we quite regularly get emails just saying, it was fantastic to be able to get access to this material without having to pay anything for it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. When I discovered it, it was probably like last month. And I was like, who are all these people?
Yeah.
And why are they so interested in Anglo-Indians? I did not know people were interested in these studies. I did not know it was a thing. And I found Brent's name in there. I was like, why is Brent? It was blowing my mind. Like people all across the world were like spending time on what I thought was, we don't think much of it, right? We just growing up, it's to find out like there's this whole journal and people are studying the culture as and doing research and spending the time. It's like, what's going on? And, like my mind is being blown. It's a great thing.
We try to part of the reviewing process and things, but make sure things are pretty accessible. That they're interesting and readable. And certainly the conferences or workshops that Brent and I run, we do at each reunion. We usually they're built into the programs now. We have two research events. One is a showcase where researchers are invited to speak for, about 10 minutes on the research they're doing, and in a way that will be of interest to the Anglo-Indian participants of the reunion. And then we usually have always now have a workshop as well, where papers can be a bit more in depth, longer. And we always expect that just other researchers will be interested in that part of the program, or mainly just other researchers. But in fact, in Canberra, just about everyone who came to the morning session, which was a showcase, also they came after lunch, so there was an actual break where people could very easily move away. and they came back
Oh, wow.
so they had a whole day of hearing about research that was going on.
Yeah.
So it's alive. You're right.
Yes.
You know, who are
Yes.
all these people? They're a great group of people, lots of, who are
Yes.
very interested and dedicated to their research, and yeah, very interested, and from all sorts of different history,
Yeah.
religion, literature,
Yes.
anthropology,
Yeah. Yeah.
lots of
History.
different.
History is fascinating. I love history, and I think sometimes it feels weird to just talk Anglo-Indian, but I think it's part of history. I like that. I grew, some of my favorite memories is sitting down with my grandmother and asking her to tell me the story she told me 100 times already. But I just loved hearing the stories, like of times, like ancient times, right? History
Yeah.
is so good, especially when you can make a connection to it.
Yes.
It's just special. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
And if
know?
it's your grandmother's story, then it's part of your story
Yeah,
as well, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. Your grandmother.
most of it was like condensed milk was like 3 paisa. Like what?
Yeah.
Like
Yes. Yeah.
stuff like that. Um, so um, so I have another question. It's uh, as you were talking about your research, right? And we were talking about um, how you approached it. I was just wondering, like in your research, have you ever found any differences in Anglo-Indians, or in your deep hangouts and your research, have you found a difference between the Roman Catholic strain and the Protestant strain? Is there any difference, or they're culturally, or the way they are brought up, the way they think, they act? Is it any different, or they've kind of
Um,
merged?
that's a good question, and it may have been more relevant in the past before I started doing the research. Because now that was one of the things that I found out. I did a survey called Anglo-Indians Count. It was sort of a count, but also just a survey of
Yeah,
West Bengal. In West Bengal, worked with Barry O'Brien to try and get sort of a bit of a census, but really a survey of
sure.
where Anglo-Indian, who, how Anglo-Indians were doing
Yeah.
in Calcutta and in West Bengal, actually. And one of the interesting things that we found out was that about 90% of Anglo-Indians are Catholic.
Oh, 90%, really?
Yeah. Now, so
Okay.
that's why I say
Yeah,
that it might be
sure.
um, a bit different in the past. I mean, what I've been told is because I still feel as though I go to these places and there are quite a few Anglo Indians
Yeah,
there. But of course, people like my husband who grew up in Calcutta, born in New Delhi and grew up in Calcutta, he says, there's hardly any Anglo Indians now. But I still see quite a few, and that the clubs are still alive. And but a lot of what I was told was it was a lot of the Church of England, the Anglican Anglo-Indians who left. That in many cases they were wealthier. So I don't know. This is the sort of thing that I've been told. But from my own experience and my own research, I can't say.
yeah,
I would not be able to say what the
yeah,
differences were. I do
yeah,
not discern because there are very Christian and practicing
yeah,
Anglicans or Church of North India, Church of South India
yeah,
now, as much as there are, and they're people who help the other community in terms of help the community. I mean, in terms of social services, who um, some are Catholic and some are Church of North India. So
yeah,
and in
yeah.
terms of culture, I couldn't say either.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
always a weird thing, like because growing up, if your friend's an Anglo-Indian, you your expectation was like you're 100% uh, identical. Maybe you have your own personal likes or dislikes, right? But it was
Yes.
it was weird when we go to church. I'll have a friend, a Protestant friend. We'll pass his church first, and he take a left, and then I'll go on straight. And that was the first time it struck me we are different. Uh,
Mhm.
we are Anglo-Indian, but this is a major difference. I don't know what happens in that mystery building, but he's an Anglo-Indian too, but he's doing something different,
He's going
right?
to a different church. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then in
yeah.
school, in high school, we had like catechism, and the Protestants had something else.
Yeah,
Again,
Sunday
like,
school or something.
yeah, it was so. That's when I realized, like, wait, that it's not just like, hey, I like Coke and you like Pepsi, but there's a
Yeah.
fundamental difference where we are not quite the same in this major part of your life, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
yes, I don't know. I mean, given the other comparisons you could make between Anglo-Indian Christians, just Christians,
yeah,
and Hindus or Muslims,
yeah,
the comparison, they're a lot closer
yeah,
than that.
yeah,
One place where it sort of has played out for some Anglo-Indians is in Goa. So Anglo-Indians who've made their home in, Panjim, for example, in Goa. If they're Catholics, they're well serviced with churches, although still not a lot of English masses, but at least they can go to mass. There's still a lot of Konkani rather than English. But those who are Church of North India, they it's not nearly as easy for them to practice their religion by going to church services, because Goa is still such a Catholic Christian state. Well, the Christians are mostly Catholics from Portuguese
yeah,
times,
yeah,
but
yeah,
they're Anglo-Indians.
yeah. That was. I never really thought about it, but till I heard the official definition of Anglo-Indians from Uther, and that it was. I always thought it was like you had to be from Britain, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's actually growing up. If somebody had an English name, there was, like I said, there was no gatekeeping, there was no like
Yeah.
questionnaire, right?
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
right. If the Anglo-Indian nest was good enough, yeah, you're Anglo.
Yeah.
But we
Yes.
always reference to the Goan Anglos, but we knew there's some differences, and
Yeah.
you're married to your husband, one of the mythical Anglos from Calcutta.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Well,
I,
that's why, this book is important too, isn't
yes,
it? So, starts off with the Portuguese because they were the first Europeans.
yes,
So they're, when they married and had children, those children were the first Anglo-Indians. So they were not part of a community then, but
yeah.
the community has to start somewhere, and that's where it started.
And was that in Goa? Pretty much the first Anglo.
Calcutta.
Oh,
Sorry, Kerala. I'm getting tired.
oh, so the first. Wait.
Yeah,
Oh
in
wow,
Kerala.
really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, that's where Vasco da Gama landed in
So you
Kerala.
would say that's the source of all Anglo-Indians, like the Adam and Eve of Anglo-Indian. Not maybe in that context, but
Um, yes, but there were lots of different Adam and Eves, and that
got
there
it.
were also, when the when the Dutch came,
Yeah,
and when the English came, so there would be first generation
yeah,
Anglo-Indians from the British and an Indian,
yeah,
a British soldier, for example, and an Indian
yeah,
woman. They would also be first generation.
yeah,
So there were lots of first generations of different
yeah,
European backgrounds, but the first Anglo-Indians,
yeah,
the first people who would be identified as be able to be defined as Anglo-Indians by the current definition that did not exist then,
yeah, yeah,
were the children of the Portuguese who
yeah,
had married Indian women.
yeah. Do you know when the definition was, when it was coined?
1911.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, it was because they were called Anglo-Indians were called various other names, which is actually one of the interesting things on that painting back there, that it's got a number of different names,
Hmm.
Eurasian,
Yeah.
half, and
Uh,
it's got other names. It's also got Anglo-Indian there,
uh,
and it's got Indo English, I think, is there as well, and
half, half.
so,
I
but it was
was.
2019, no, 1911, sorry,
Yeah.
that just before a census, because the census in India is every 11 years, that it was the name Anglo-Indian with that definition was introduced.
That's funny that you mentioned half, half, because my son recently, we were talking, and he referred to himself as half breed.
Okay. Yeah.
It sounds like something from like a Lord of the Rings or a Harry Potter where they say get the half breed
Yes.
as
Yeah.
he's running away. And I thought it
I
was a
know it's not how we like to think of people, is it?
yes, yeah. It sounds
Yeah.
like a magical creature. Get the half breed. So I tease him every
Yeah.
now and then. I
Yeah.
say get the half breed. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, so some people, have argued. I think Michelle, who did the artist who did this painting,
yeah,
she published an article in the journal as well. She's um, and I don't think it was in that article. It was in something else that she talked about the fact that it's not half cast. They're actually double. They've got two lots. They
yeah,
come from two things
yeah,
rather than half,
yeah,
which
yeah,
I thought was quite a nice way
yeah,
of
yeah.
looking at things.
What was the most surprising, either surprising or interesting thing that you discovered, stumbled upon, or in your time, in your deep hangs? I like that word. I'm going to use that.
Deep
The deep
hanging
hang.
out.
Yes.
Yeah, deep hanging out.
Or,
Yeah.
or your research or whatever. What was like the most interesting thing
Um,
that?
Goodness. Well, all the serendipitous things were all interesting. They came as a surprise. Um, Actually, one thing that I found for Anglo-Indians in New Zealand was they talked about how fatigued they get at having to explain who they were.
Yeah.
That they just wouldn't bother because it was too complicated.
Yeah.
That people didn't really want to know unless you could tell them in one phrase, maybe not
Yes.
even a sentence, just a phrase. You might find the same. So I sort of coined the term explanation fatigue. I was just fatigued at having to always explain
Exactly.
who we are and how we came to be
Yes. You can
Anglo-Indian.
you can tell them because I've spoken to like a lot of people on this podcast, and everybody tells me the same thing. They explain it, which is why when I found out like people were studying Anglo-Indians, I like, who are these people? Have to explain this to everybody. But then there are people who who spend their lives studying it. It's like on opposite ends. They probably know, like you and Brent probably know more about Anglo-Indians than I do, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
history. And then
yeah,
there are people that I have to explain and get fatigued where I just don't, yeah, I'm
yeah.
Indian. And,
As you say, yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
so,
Brent is Anglo-Indian as well on his mother's side, whereas
yeah,
I don't
okay,
have any
got it.
any link. But his mother is an Anglo-Indian from Calcutta.
Oh wow! Oh, the Calcutta
Yeah.
Anglos. I'm glad I get to meet these
Yeah,
Calcutta
yeah.
Ang.
That explanation, my daughters sometimes, what they have said to me, your job is so hard to explain to people. That they ask, so what does your mum do? She's a social anthropologist. What is that? So what does she? Okay, so that's what a social anthropologist does.
Yeah,
What does she focus on? Anglo-Indians. What is that? Who are Anglo-Indians? So yes, we also have it a bit at
yes,
our house, in our house as well,
awesome.
not just for Keith.
So I was reading up. I know, and I'm not sure if I read this number correctly, but in 1969 was assumed to be like 30,000 Anglos just in Calcutta. It said like either 30,000 individuals or families, which
Yeah,
means it could
yeah.
be, if you estimated, let's say
Multiply
60.
that by 4 or 5, or yeah,
Yeah, that many just in Calcutta alone.
yeah,
Wow, that's in 1969. Do you think? And I asked Uther this as well. Like, what's his thoughts
yeah.
um, as you speak to people and you have a better pulse on on the Anglo-Indian community? Do you see what's your read on the migration? Or I'm more curious. I think of it like this, like an Anglo-Indian desert, right? Like if you take a small place, even maybe a city that was thriving with Anglo-Indians,
Yes,
but is now maybe not nationally, but at one place is at risk of having very little to no Anglo-Indians.
yeah.
Do you come across pockets like that, what's your read on that?
Pockets where there are very few Anglo-Indians, you mean?
Yeah, where it's
Yeah.
consistently, noticeably dwindling, but not being
Yeah,
replenished.
yeah. Well, certainly the small towns.
Yeah.
I'd be told when we did the research on for that book, Beyond the Metros, um, I'd be told that in the good old days, that was a
Yes.
term that often came out. We could fill a hall at Christmas time or for a Christmas tree. There'd be so many children, and now there's just 30 so definitely the
Yeah.
numbers are dwindling. I think there's migration to the cities as well, but the
Yeah.
numbers are dwindling. I
Yeah.
agree. I mean, I'd like to think that there's um, that it that there is enough interest in being and maintaining and nurturing Anglo-Indianness that it will continue. That the associations and the social services and the clubs and that sort of thing will continue, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It
Yeah.
has changed a lot since
Yeah.
the, in the time that I've been carrying out research. I know of, I don't get the other way. I don't get a sense of the majority of people having gone in that time, the 20 odd years, but I know of a lot of people who have gone,
Yeah.
individuals who have gone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess they are still going. It's harder to move now. The countries that people would like to go
Yeah.
to England, to Canada, to Australia, to New Zealand, to the States.
Yeah.
It's much harder for people to migrate to those countries now, whether they're Anglo-Indian or whether they're other Indians
Yeah.
or other people from other countries.
Yeah. I've heard I've heard of this thing that, and you can shed some light, and maybe if you know about it as well. I'd love to. Uh, a lot of my friends, well, quite a few of them said like, "Hey, I found papers proving that my grandfather either was a European, like a Brit, or he served in the army, or in some way was closely associated with them, and they had paperwork to prove it.
Yeah.
And if they submit that paperwork, there's no other way. They say, "Yep, you're free to come to our country." What's
Yeah.
that? Are you aware of that, and how that
Yes.
works?
Yes, I think if people, I'm not sure what Britain's, because it's up to Britain to make those rules
Sure.
about who enters, and I'm not
Yeah.
sure what the position is at the moment. But certainly, even in New Zealand, because we have a lot of people, migrants from Britain, even
Yeah.
in New Zealand, I mean, it'd be the same. If your grandfather or grandparent was born in England and you've got the papers
Okay.
to show it, then you would have access to
Oh wow.
also live in England. So I think it's probably, I don't know if it's the same as that
Okay.
at the moment,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but I know what you mean. I know certainly in the past they were
Yeah.
treasured pieces of um, documentation
Yeah.
that would
Yes.
prove that your father or your grandfather
Yes.
was born in Britain.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people lost that
Yeah.
documentation. So they have this family history, family understanding, but unless they can prove it with a document
Yeah.
or get it from, the British Library,
Yeah.
India,
Yeah.
India office,
Yeah.
there's
I
a possibility if they don't have the document themselves
yeah.
anymore, there might still be records of it, of
Yeah.
course.
I,
And
s-
there's a lot of genealogical work that
yes.
people do for exactly that.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
DNA isn't enough. You have to have the documentation.
Yes, I see that as an interesting document. Like if I ever found it, it's more like it's almost like a birth certificate. Almost, it's like it's like
Yeah,
discovering. Okay, this
yeah,
is an official document that goes back and traces ancestry, as opposed
yeah,
to an immigration card. Um,
yes,
you know,
yeah.
last
That's
last question for you is: do the Anglo-Indians or uh, over here? Um, People think get us confused with the Hispanic or like South Americans, right?
right.
Because of a slightly browner skin.
Yeah.
Is there a confusion between Anglo-Indians and the Maori, or any?
Yes. Yes,
There
there is.
is.
That came up quite a lot. That in the research and interviewing people. So one woman said that when her mum came from from India. She was getting off the bus, and a Maori woman getting off the, what did I say, boat. A Maori woman greeted her with a hongi, which is called a hongi, touched noses, and welcomed her. And somebody else said that they commented on the person's accent, because they said, you spent too much time overseas, bro. You've lost your Maori accent. So yes, so that is, in terms of the explanation fatigue. Sometimes when people are confused. So my husband was as a school teacher. Somebody said to him one time, "What iwi are you from, sir?" So iwi is tribe.
Okay.
So that's sort of all part of that misidentification. And that, yes, that does happen in New Zealand. There's a number of people who said that. So if you're not Pākehā, not white, from somewhere European, then you're probably Maori.
Yeah.
And that would be the biggest group of people. Well, it has been, not anymore, because there are a lot of Asian migrants in New Zealand now. But that was the biggest group that was not white, in terms of whiteness.
Yeah.
So yes, so I can understand.
Yes.
Yeah.
So actually, I lied. I have one last question for you. First of all, before I get to that, I just want to say thank you so much. I really enjoy speaking with you, and I really got a sense of. Let me tell you, like when I listen, there's this one of my favorite bands. They spent some time in India. They're all Americans, right? But they spent some time in India, and they came back and they recorded an album. And when I listened to the lyrics, right, a lot of bands can write songs about another country, but there are certain observations you hear in the lyrics that you can tell these people studied it. They actually, as they are noticing the things that only a person who has done a deep hanging can notice, right, in the lyrics. And that's why I love it, because it's done so well, because they talk about the villages, all the little nuanced things, like, and I get that from you. So you weren't just a tourist or a traveler, but you've done the deep hang, and you understand the nuances. We don't have to explain it. You get it, and you can also speak it back, right? So I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate I appreciate you saying that.
Yes. My last question we might fight over, but it's like, are you a cricket fan, or are you rugby, more of a rugby fan, or neither?
I'm not an ardent fan of either. Probably more rugby, and it might be because the games are shorter.
Sure, I get it. We disagree on something, at least.
I will watch high level, like World Cup.
Yeah.
That sort of level.
Yeah.
And I will watch my grandchildren.
Okay, nice.
Play cricket. I've got two grandchildren in particular who live in Auckland, and they're very good cricketers, and I enjoy watching them play cricket. Yeah. That's different, of course.
Yes,
absolutely. But that's my answer.
Awesome, Robyn. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. I do hope we get to meet maybe in 2026.
Yes, you're likely to go there.
I'm hoping to. Yeah, that would be nice.